Hi, welcome to the class. We'll start with fundamentals. I know sometimes fundamentals can seem a bit boring and it's tempting to skip to the fun part, but the fun part will be even more fun if you master the fundamentals right. It will be your base for the future knowledge about typography, even if you already know most of the definitions or classification methodologies. With a solid foundation, you will be able to classify a typeface or recognize their origin, understand their characteristics and what they represent. Their application will be much easier to determine. Classification will help you to combine typefaces better in the future. In the first chapter, we will cover two parts. Classification part, where I will show you how to classify typefaces based on form principles, and in fundamentals part, we'll go through few important definitions and of course the type anatomy. I will try to explain the crucial things about elements and definitions, so it will be easier to follow in the later chapters. Classification teaches us how to look at typefaces through the lens of form, history, and visual aesthetics. Font classification is not an easy task, not because of lack of understanding by designers, but because of the different standards influenced by geographical location and language through the history. Then, with the rise of internet and web typography, classification became even more daunting task. Comparing books and modern online resources, it is yet more obvious how classification is almost everywhere different. With the rise of type foundries on the web, classification became even more simplified, or just diverse. To solve this puzzle, we need to take a step back into history. Over the years, typography enthusiasts have developed various systems to define type categories and their subgroups. But broadly speaking, we can classify most typefaces into four basic groups: those with serifs, those without serifs, scripts, and decorative styles. But if we look at the historical classification, detailed distinction of serif typefaces was made by French Maximilien Vaux, where we have four main subcategories. German DIN classification puts emphasis on black-letter typefaces, where we have five subcategories. And British standards put focus on sans serif typefaces, where we have four main subcategories. These three classifications follow the same structure, which is based on historic evolution of a typeface, with some subtle variations and differences. You can find these classification systems in typography history, and they are also taught in school, but in practice they are rarely used efficiently. Although the historic classification, when mastered, is quite effective, but for the most design practitioners and beginners, it makes it quite confusing. For example, what makes a fresh new typeface and an old style typeface? Or other typeface that is from 1800, a modern typeface? Different ways of naming those groups and their subgroups brings a lot of confusion. Furthermore, when we examine categorization on type foundries found online and other type resources or magazines about typography, classification is adjusted to a broader audience, so it can be easier to understand. In a way, we see more simplified terminology. These simplified main groups are categorized as serif typefaces, sans serif, slab serif, display, handwritten, and blackletter. Each of these main groups have their own subgroups or subcategories with belonging typefaces. We will focus on these two main groups, serif and sans serif typefaces. We will explore their subcategories or so-called subgroups by using a different methodology of classifying compared to historical classification. Classification that is based on form of a typeface. This should give you an understanding and teach you how to classify a typeface and use it with purpose. Let's start with serif typefaces. A serif is a small shape, a feature, that appears at the beginning or at the end of the stroke on a letter. Sometimes is referred as head serif or foot serif. To further categorize serif typefaces, there are three main subgroups: dynamic, transitional, and static. As I mentioned before, classification of these subgroups of a main serif group is according to the form model, which means the names of subgroups are determined by the principles of typeface's form. The first group is called dynamic. The letter forms are open or pronounced. The contrast axis, or so-called stress, of round letters is slightly inclined to the left. Their handwritten origins are noticeable in their construction and form. The stroke contrast is usually low. However, there are typefaces with more visible stroke contrast as a part of this group. You can see the organic type serifs. The serifs are usually bracketed and sometimes asymmetrical. Here you can see calligraphic terminals because of the angled pen. The first letters were written with angled pen, and from there we have visible this construction of calligraphic terminals. Terminals are the end of the strokes. They can be serif-like, like in this case, or without it if typeface is sans serif. Here you can see the stress or the contrast. It's angled slightly to the left. Here are other examples of typefaces that belong to this group. Another identifier can be a lower X height compared to the other following subcategories. Also, another good identifier is that Sometimes there is a slanted crossstroke on a letter E. You can see it here on this example, on this typeface. It's slightly going up, so you can recognize it there. You can see the angle stress or the contrast axis here in the letter forms and here. Here are some examples of dynamic serif typefaces, how they work in use. The second category is transitional, sometimes referred as realistic or baroque, but by the form principles, it's somewhere in between the first dynamic and the next one static. That's why it's called transitional. The stroke contrast is even stronger than in the first dynamic subgroup. The stress axis is more vertical, or sometimes it can be slightly inclined to the left. Here you can see on letter E. Serifs are bracketed and the X height is generally a bit larger. The terminals are rounded, often like small teardrops. You can see here on this example. And as I mentioned, the vertical stress is more vertical and sometimes angled. It's like a combination of two of those. Here are some type examples of those characteristics. You can see the contrast is moderate and the stress angle is varying. Let's check some examples of these transitional serif typefaces in use. And the last subcategory of serif typefaces is static, sometimes referred as rational, modern, didone. You can see the stroke contrast is very, very clear and sometimes very extreme. Their stress angle or contrast axis is vertical. The form of the letters are quite closed. With the high stroke contrast and vertical stress, static typefaces are complete opposite of the dynamic ones that we saw in the first group. Their serifs are horizontal, thin, mainly symmetrical, and sometimes bracketed. Here you can see that they are characterized by strong vertical stroke contrast. They have a small aperture, often with this roundish terminal. The typefaces in this category are less written and more built, constant in proportion and structure. Here you can see static or sometimes called modern serif typefaces in use. Their contrast is very, very visible and they are not suited for smaller sizes. Now we will go through sans serif subcategories. Sans from French meaning without. In the sans serif typefaces there are four main subgroups or subcategories: dynamic, transitional, static, and geometric. Yes, you guessed it, the classification of subgroups is determined by the same principles of form, like with the serif typefaces. Only here we have additional subgroup that's called geometric. There are a lot of similarities with dynamic subgroups of the serif typefaces. The letter forms are open and pronounced. The stroke contrast is usually low. However, there are some typefaces with visible stroke contrast in this group. The uppercase letters, capitals, are varied width, and the leg of capital R is usually diagonal. And if you look at the letter O, it's nearly a perfect circle. These typefaces have a larger X height, so that may help with the reading smaller text. The lowercase a and G are usually double story, meaning that letters have two counters. Sometimes it's open and sometimes it's closed. Here, counters are wide open. You can see the aperture here, how open it is. The term aperture describes the distance between two strokes in a character that do not enclose the interior form. Like example for in A or E, C, S. The size of aperture in a typeface influences legibility. Here are some examples. You can see that they have much lower contrast, a big X height, so they are suitable for reading from larger distance. Here you can see them in use as a running text or body text, or like headlines and some more running text. Transitional typefaces have regular proportions. The uppercase letters are of similar width. The contrast axis of round letters like O and E is vertical or slightly inclined to the left. These grotesque typefaces have relatively static forms based on the oval and very closed apertures. G often has a spur, and the X height is usually lower. When they first appeared in the early mid-1800s, they were known as the ugly, due to their rejection of elegance of historic serif styles and serif typefaces. It wasn't a style that was enjoyed by all, and because of its unattractive nature, it was labeled by some as grotesque. Here are some examples of transitional sans serif typefaces or so-called grotesque typefaces. also sometimes referred as Gothic or realistic typefaces. They're maybe called ugly, but definitely they have a character. Third category is static, or the neo-grotesque or more rational typefaces. They have very little stroke contrast at all, with horizontal terminals here and very closed apertures. Because of their small stroke contrast and their similar forms, they are visually engaging when used as a larger size, which presents them better in a display format. Almost geometrical appearance, with very little contrast and consistent terminals. Here you can see consistent terminals. Again, vertical stress, single story G, that is quite common for these typefaces, and the horizontal terminals ending here and here. These fonts completely abandon the traditional characteristics to make them simpler and more minimalistic. Here are some examples of static sans serif typefaces in use. I really like their simple form and lack of contrast or very low contrast. Together with the transitional subgroup or so-called grotesque, these two are my favorite groups. And the last category is geometric typefaces or constructed. Typefaces constructed from simple geometric shapes. Geometric typefaces might seem simple and easy to design, but in reality, there are a lot of subtle optical adjustments to make them visually pleasing. Looking very clean, rounded, and friendly. Although forms, such as the circle of the letter A, seems to be perfectly round, the majority of proper typefaces don't contain perfect circles. Simple geometric shapes with optical adjustments. They have really minimal contrast, and usually a single story A, that is quite common. The X height is also low. That can cause problems if used as a body text and set in a smaller size. Here are some examples of geometric typefaces. Usually they have been optically corrected to give the illusion that they are circular, so they harmonize well with other letter forms. Here are some examples of geometric sans serif typefaces in use. They have this structured and round look and feel. If you compare naming of subcategories in serif and sans serif groups, you can see that classification based on the form principle is much simpler. It's much easier to remember and use compared to the classification that is related to a certain style or a period in history. This way, you are always looking at the typefaces based on their form and then connecting with it other ways how they are called. Knowing how to classify typefaces, you will know about their characteristics and know what they represent. From there, it's easier to connect it with your brand or a project. Also, when going through type foundries and checking the recently published typefaces, you will slowly start to see the origin or recognize the influence on which are those typefaces built upon. We'll touch upon a few more elements of anatomy to round up the knowledge from the previous part or to make it more clear. Feel free to extend your knowledge about type terminology online. You will be able to engage in more meaningful conversation about type and understand more details while getting the big picture. We'll go through some really basic terms so it can help you to follow along easier and understand it better. Let's start with character. A character is a symbol that represents a letter. Character is most basic unit of written language. For example, a letter, a number, a punctuation mark, or another symbol. A glyph, in the other hand, is a graphical representation of a character. So the difference is, if you look at one font, a character can be represented by multiple glyphs. For example, a font can contain several glyphs for each letter, a lowercase a and a small cap a. Also, it can have an alternate forms, such as single or double story a, or an a with a swashtail. In this way, a single character can be represented by different glyphs. Weight refers to the relative thickness of a font stroke. It's the thickness of the lines of each letter. Most of the typefaces have at least few weights. For example, they can include thin, ultra-thin, light, regular, medium, semi-bold, bold, etc. I like typefaces with multiple weights because it gives me more flexibility to get the visual aesthetic I'm aiming for. I will not use many weights on one project, but maybe I will use a different ones on another project and get a totally different look and feel. But keep in mind, if you are buying a license for a whole family with a lot of weights, the price can increase depending on family size. But if you really like the typeface, it's totally worth it. Width, not to confuse it with weight, width is determined by the widest point of the outermost lines of the letter. Some examples include condensed, extra condensed, narrow, extended or expanded. Some typefaces have extreme differences, from the very tight condense to a super expanded width. I'm a big fan of those extremes. I don't know why. Probably it has something to do with contrast or something else subjective. A proportional typeface contains glyphs of varying widths. If you remember from the classification part, some subcategories compared to others have less varying widths or more varying widths, while monospace or non-proportional typefaces uses the single standard width for all of the glyphs in the font. Many people generally find proportional typefaces nicer looking and easier to read. However, many proportional fonts contain fixed width tabular figures, so that columns of numbers stay aligned. Monospace typefaces function better for some purposes because their glyphs line up in neat, regular columns. Monospaced fonts are commonly used by developers for coding because monospaced fonts may also make it easier to perform optical character recognition. We already covered some basic terms of type anatomy in the section about history and classification. Here we will not go through all of them, but just the most important ones. Type designers have came up with some very human terms to describe the details of the letter forms they create. Here you can see crotch, leg, shoulder, an eye, a counter. This is a special name for counter. Here we have ear, basically a lot of body parts. For the position-wise, here we have a baseline. That's the imaginary line on which most of the letters and other characters sit. Above baseline, we have mean line. It's the line at the top of the X height. It's the height of the lowercase letters. Above mean line, there's a cap line, the imaginary line that marks the upper boundary of capital letters, and also some ascenders, lowercase letters. Ascender line, that's the part of the lowercase letter that rises above the main body of the letter. It goes above the X height. And the final thing is descender line, a piece of a letter that extends below the baseline. Counters oftentimes can be confusing. So let me summarize the difference between counter or a closed space or aperture. A counter is area of a letter that is entirely or partially enclosed by the letter form or a symbol. An aperture is opening between an open counter and the outside of the letter. So you can see it here. This is an aperture, and this is the counter. So we have closed counter and open counter. And as we mentioned before, a special name counter, I. Check more about the type anatomy online. It will help you in your further learnings about typography. A ligature is a single sort in which two or more letters are joined, usually to improve space between them, or ligature might be as a decorative choice for branding or aesthetic purposes, or just a cue for linguistic purposes. There are few ligatures that are still seen today, such as connected FI, FL, or the triple play FFI, sometimes also FFL, and even the stylish CT ligature. You can access those in Figma together with more properties by clicking on the type details. The range of additional properties varies from typeface to typeface. In Sketch, you can access it through navigation bar. You go to text, open type features, and then ligatures. A less known is Gazuk, the decoration which connects two letters of a ligature, sometimes used for branding. Last thing I will mention in these chapters are diacritics. Diacritic is a symbol that tells the reader how to pronounce a letter. In my native language, Croatian, there are a few of those. Even my last name has one. It's sh, šestak. Few others are pronounced ž, ch, and ć. You should definitely check Diacritica blog. It's run by Croatian typographer Marko Hrastovec. You can see there are a lot of very creative examples of diacritics misuse in everyday life. Choosing a typeface for a design project is both objective and subjective process. It requires a good taste. It is a skill that takes a long time to master. But like any other skill, it can be practiced and learned. There aren't any shortcuts to become an expert at it, but there are some principles that can help you to speed up your game. In this chapter, we will go through the methods of type selection process. We will cover aspects of type that you need to be aware of, and what details to look for and how to evaluate a good typeface. Typography is viewed by contemporary designers as a way of communication. Typefaces are conveying a message. They have personality, function, and purpose. Let's look at the three main aspects of typography. Typefaces have functional properties, which include size, general shape, stroke width, serif, and other elements we talked about in the previous chapter. They have semantic properties, on which we'll focus on this part of the chapter, where we look at the type through personality and aesthetics. Typefaces have their voice, and it can change based on context or how they are used. And the third aspect is textual organization, type arrangement, through letter spacing, line height, alignment, and all the other details that we'll cover in typesetting chapter. A good typography reinforces the meaning of text. It plays a huge role in visual communication of a brand. It reflects tone and builds brand recognition. When we look at the brands through the lens of typography, we can see how different they are. Some of them are more elegant and mellow, calm, sophisticated, while others are more playful and friendly. Typefaces have their own personality. It's a voice of words. That voice can be loud and daring, and sometimes can be quite direct. Good typography is about knowing what your brand stands for, and how does that voice sound like. I'm not talking here about the obvious ones, the ready-made personality typefaces that just look cheesy, even though I'm sure that they also can have a purpose too, somehow. A selected typeface that is appropriate should help you with your visual message, with whatever you are trying to say. Depending on what you are trying to express, there should be a typeface existing somewhere that is more appropriate than others. Besides personality, typefaces can also have moods, just like people, sometimes excited, happy, other times angry or sad. They can be presented as confident or as mysterious, depending on the context of use. Let's look at the examples. Here we have Founder's Grotesque, a typeface from the Klim Type Foundry. It is a contemporary typeface with a classic grotesque twist. Really nice looking typeface. It combines the best details from the last century into a well-designed, up-to-date typeface. When we put it in a different context, this typeface can perform various typographic roles. Comparing Obadiah Coffee brand with the British Academy identity, the difference is significant. We see a completely different mood. Or here, where typeface is used as identity of Faculty Brewing Co. Depending on the context and combination of other design elements, visually, it can perform radically different. Here we see more different examples of use, setting a different tone across various industries. Another great example is identity of the National Museum of Republic in Brazil. There are really numerous examples of different moods. Even though typefaces are carriers of design and they rarely act completely alone, well, at least most of the time. When put into context with other design elements, they form a whole. They communicate visually and give a certain tone. On the other hand, when the type is the only graphic element that carries the communication, then we need to push it even more to get that different mood that is appropriate for a given context. We'll do that by applying basic design principles while arranging type, getting all those small details that give a certain tone to existing personality. We will cover it more in the typesetting chapter. There is an important question before you start researching typefaces. Are you researching for an appropriate typeface for a particular purpose or a project in mind? Or you are searching to see what is out there, to find interesting typefaces and catalog them for the future use? The process is quite similar, but when you are searching for a project, it would be good to have at least a broad idea of what kind of a typeface you are searching for. What are the needs of the project and context of use? All the needy and greedy stuff from the brief together with the vision of art direction. What are you trying to achieve and what kind of a visual communication is imperative for this project? I usually start by checking my lists. I have categorized lists of typefaces by groups, characteristics, or personality. I write down a few adjectives or keywords of what I'm looking for in a typeface. This helps me to narrow my search and find those physical attributes which are aligned with the brand or a design direction. I also check my favorite foundries, these ones here and many more. I will list them in a download file so you can check them by yourself. While searching for type, I explore inspiration galleries like Tumblr, Save It, or Pinterest, going down the rabbit hole. I exercise classification, trying to determine the origin, by looking at typeface style, form, and anatomy to figure out from which era or subcategory are particular elements used and combined. Other times just going with the instinct or a gut feeling, the emotional reaction that I get when I look at a particular typeface. When looking at type, I ask myself, what does this typeface communicate to me? Why did it grab my attention? Are there any particular details that stand out? What is my first impression? That's the important one. And also, how did I felt when I saw it? Sometimes it's a matter of personal taste. and I'm trying to choose a typeface that speaks to me visually in a way that could work for a project. TypeWolf, Fonts in Use, Typographica are my stops during the research. If I find anything interesting, I like to read the review on Typographica before researching about it even more. Typefaces are systems of letters, not just individual letters, so we need to look at them as a whole. Before I try or buy a typeface, I like to review the type specimen to find out more information about a certain typeface. I read about thinking and what went into a process of making. What inspired the type designer for that particular typeface? What influenced the decision-making process? And if I really like the type, I will also research more about the type designer and other typefaces that she or he created. I examine the technical features and characteristics in detail. It uncovers type primary purpose and reveals its strengths. Type specimen will give you a lot of valuable insights, maybe teach you a thing or two about type making process. And for me, it's also inspirational. When I see all of the styles, examples of typesetting, I get inspired by the idea what you can do with this typeface. And a final thing, if you find anything interesting, save it. Don't forget to catalog your findings somehow. You can do it in any way it suits you. I like to create lists of typefaces together with links to type foundries or independent type designers. I keep it in Evernote, but you can do it whatever works for you best. Notion, Keep, Google Docs, whatever. When we know the brand character or understand the art direction requirements, we can apply those insights into decision-making process when choosing a typeface. Like my good friend designer Hrvoje often says, if you are not designing with content, then you are decorating. Are you a designer or a decorator? The goal is to understand the essence and find the best way to lay out information for the reader. Read and immerse yourself into the topic. By familiarizing with the content, you will cover possible typographic elements. Think about the structure and what's the best way to present that content. When there is no content to start with, for whatever the reason, restrain yourself from using lorem ipsum. By using lorem ipsum, you are working with unrealistic expectations. You are skipping important parts about structuring and arranging content while thinking about the meaning and context. Use the topic or niche content as a reference point instead. It's not ideal, but is suitable for early explorations while working with type. At least you can connect the structure with meaning. Use your research skills to find the answers. If you don't have a copywriter or a content strategist on your team, make the best of it. Write your own headlines and content bits. Doesn't have to be perfect. Make it good enough to provide purpose and a goal. Use annotations to explain the main idea and meaning behind it. The most important part is to try out the typeface. Check for the free trials on Type Foundries. They have a limited number of characters, but good enough to try them. Together with Type Specimen, it should give you enough information about the typeface. It will give you an understanding how it feels when put in use. I like to try them in typeface style boards, or at least how I call them. Here, I try to typeset them in different sizes, try color, contrast, and weight. With some smaller tweaks, it's the best way to quickly try more typefaces at once, see how they work. It gives me options, side-by-side comparison of characteristics, look and feel, and the technical details. I also keep and use a simple type mood boards containing basic information about the type, like weights, special characteristics, purpose, or other insights and annotation for the future use. With every typeface, I try to have a context of use, to quickly get a feel how the typeface would work in a real environment. That is really helpful for high-level overview of the aesthetics, personality, or a mood. Different typefaces have a different purpose. Most mistakes come from trying to use any font in any context. An important distinction in typography is the difference between text type and display type. Text type is designed to be read at small sizes in large quantities as running text. Display typefaces have characteristics of a headline typeface. They have features that make them hard or tiring to read at small sizes. They are just not meant for that. Some display typefaces have a prescription for usage in their specimen. For example, it can be used from 60 point and up. You could use text typeface for headlines, but you would rarely use a display typeface for a body text. Legibility and readability. Both are important. Simplest explanation for it would be, for readability, do I want to read it? And legibility, can I read it? How we set the type impacts readability, or willingness to engage in reading. Readability has everything with text appeal and how it's arranged. Here, we have an example how, with a little bit of typesetting, we can improve readability. Legibility is a function of type's design. If it's not legible, then I cannot decipher one letter from the other. If we look at this example and this type, it is less legible than this example, where it's not a matter of size or color, but on the first example, the individual letters are harder to decipher because of the style of the typeface. A common question: is there a difference in using serif typefaces instead of sans serif ones for reading, and does it affect it? Nope. Study after study has shown that there is no major differences. The difference is so peripheral to the reading process that this effect is not even worth measuring. However, not everything needs to be super legible. It doesn't mean that we should avoid using expressive, edgy, or a little less legible typefaces if it serves the narrative or brand expression. There are also the opposites, like highly legible typefaces with generous letter shapes, specially developed for use in children's reading book, for example. Or a typeface with a greater legibility for low vision readers. It all comes to the needs and the goals of the project. A big advantage of the text on the web is that it can be resized by the user. We should aim to define relationships, not just absolute dimensions. Besides aesthetic and emotional characteristics, there are some technical things to consider while evaluating a good quality type. Look for a number of weight and width if applicable. Look for open type features. Examine the full glyph list to see a character range, punctuation, currency, numerals, etc. See ligatures and alternatives, special characters. See the possibilities of a typeface. Most good primary text typefaces have several sets of numerals. For example, proportional, where their character widths vary according to their design. Tabular, each character occupies the same amount of space, so they will line up in a vertical columns. Old style, figures mimic the lower cases with an X height, ascenders and descenders. They blend perfectly with the sentence case type. And lining, meant to be used in numerical matter or in combination with all caps text. Here we have a proportional and lining. That means that the numbers have different widths. They occupy vertical space in proportion based on their construction. And lining, meaning it aligns with the cap height. Uppercase letters here. Then we have proportional old style, where figures are mimicking lowercase letters. Look at the X heights here and the ascenders and descenders here also. For tabular or so-called monospaced, each character occupies the same amount of space, so they will line up in a vertical columns. So the opposite meanings are proportional and tabular, or lining and old style. When examining the technical characteristics, look at the proportions of related characters like NMH, BDP, OCGQ. Look at the word space. Is it balanced for the language you are using it? Check the legibility of these combinations for the letters I, L, and with uppercase I, together with number 1. Dynamic sans serifs have more distinguishable letter forms, which is worth considering if you are doing UI or a signalization design. Check the constructive kerning pairs for consistency, the built-in kerning. If you are using open and free font sources like Google Fonts, be sure to check this. There are some really good fonts there, but also there are some bad ones you should avoid. Keep an open eye for details. This is my favorite. In almost any typeface that I like to check the dagger. Dagger is used as a symbol for a footnote if asterisk is already used. Although oftentimes there isn't an occasion to use it on a project, I still like to check it with every typeface candidate. Be sure to check language support and diacritics. Oftentimes I find this happening on even established websites. My second name is spelled like this. Even if you are designing content only in English, beware of non-English characters which appear in names. If missing, it can break your design and give a wrong impression. Typefaces are intellectual property. Make sure you buy an appropriate license. Check the licensing info on the site where you buy a typeface. They can vary. If you are using Google Fonts or other open source fonts, you don't have to purchase license because it's free. They are published under licenses that allow you to use them on any websites, whether it's commercial or personal. In this chapter, we will examine which typefaces work together and which don't. We will go through a lot of examples to see why some pairs work better than others. We will cover some important principles which can speed up your pairing process. We will also examine different approaches of combining and looking in on small details when judging typeface pairs. There are some quick practices which you can start applying today. But keep in mind, these are not some bulletproof quick recipes to make your selections flawless. They are suggested guidelines and a great place to start. Try using one family. Yes, that means you are not combining completely different typefaces. You are combining different styles of one family. Sometimes that's more than enough for a project. Ask yourself, does my project need a second typeface? Can I achieve a great result for this project by simply using one single family? We can't say for sure that we're gonna do a better job just by using more typefaces. Try to use one family to get the desired result. Select a family with enough variations for the project needs. Advantage of using one family is that all of the variations in that family have the same foundation in letter construction, meaning that they will match and work well with any other member of that family. To accomplish interesting looking layout and the dynamic looking type, use contrast in typographic scale. Use color, size, weight, and width to achieve enough contrast. But be moderate in use. Do not use all of the tools at once. A good design is about the right balance. Let's look at a few examples of font families that have a lot of variety and a lot of widths and weight options. This typeface is called Inter, and it's a sans serif typeface, and it comes in 9 weights. Another example is Fan Grotesque. It is a typeface that comes in 9 weights and 18 styles. Next example is Fortescue. I hope the pronunciation is right. It comes in 12 weights and 24 styles. Going to some heavyweights, this is Neue World of Angram Pangram Type Foundry with 48 styles. Yeah, 48. That's a lot. And a really big heavyweight contender comes from the Northern Block Type Foundry. A typeface with 9 weights plus italics, 5 weights, and with astonishing 90 styles. You can choose between 90 styles for your design. That's a lot of options. Let's check some examples where designers were using only one font family. Here's the usage of only one font family. The family is Untitled Sans from the Klim Type Foundry. There's some really nice use of contrast and balance, really nice use of white space as well. Here's the usage of Neue World and usage of GT America for a completely different look and feel. Here we have Canela, that is a display typeface. It's not suited for small sizes, but if you have a large type, it can work. Another example of GT America, here with completely different vibe of a project, different look and feel. Another example of Untitled Sans, here in more toned down, minimal aesthetic, and quite contemporary design. By using a single font family, job is far from being over. Just by selecting a typeface from the same family doesn't mean that we are in a clear, that our work will be easy. We still need to make the typography work, choosing the right typeface that speaks the tone and works for the right purpose. Another good practice is pairing twins. Twins, serif and sans serif fonts of the same family, like Stone Serif and Stone Sans. And superfamilies are those in which the typefaces in a family fall into many classifications. They can make some really nice results when paired together because of the huge differences and the similarities as well. They have similar proportions, the construction is from the same base, but they are different in style. Typefaces paired like that will not have the construction clash, but they will have a pleasing contrast and a great visual tension in design. Check out this pair, Swiss, the sans serif typeface, together with Swiss Works, the serif typeface from the same family. You can find those at Swiss Typeface Foundry. They also have a really neat licensing. When you buy a typeface, you don't have to buy an extra license for each media type. Once you got yourself a license, you can use these fonts repeatedly in multiple projects for various clients and an unlimited amount of media. That includes print, websites, electronic publications, mobile apps, videos, films, you name it. Check the licensing information on every type foundry because they are different from foundry to foundry. Another great contemporary pair is a twin Untitled Sans and Untitled Serif from the Klim Type Foundry. Really beautiful design typeface family. There's an interesting story by Chris Soursby, the director and lead type designer of the Klim Type Foundry. It's about the process of Untitled Sans and Untitled Serif. He talks about the process of making these typefaces and how he didn't expect for them to become that popular. The talk is both funny and super interesting. I believe it's on YouTube. Just type in YouTube search Untitled with Chris Soursby. I will provide the link. This example is Value Sans and Value Serif from the Column Foundry. They have 7 weights and 11 styles combined together. Let's see how those pairs and superfamilies work in projects. Here it's example of Swiss and Swiss Works for Montreal Biennale by Principal Studio. Example of Untitled Sans and Untitled Serif working together. Really nice contrast and overall typesetting. Everything is nicely aligned and harmonious. Another example of Swiss pair, here for a different purpose. Here also for in-your-face website and a different medium. Even in newspaper design, there is a possibility to achieve enough contrast and nice overall feel by using twins. Yet again, another example of Untitled Sans and Untitled Serif. It is so nice that you can achieve a different look and feel by using same typefaces, but in a slightly different way. More examples of pairs, Value Sans and Value Serif, in a different medium and slightly different aesthetic. Let's check some superfamilies. So superfamilies are those in which the fonts in a family fall into many classifications. Like this Swiss superfamily. It has sans, serif, mono, condensed, screen, noe, you name it. A superfamily should provide you with enough options to choose from. Here we have a freight superfamily from Garage Fonts Foundry. Superfamilies are like Swiss knife, having a solution for almost every problem or situation. They are convenient to use because of many styles, and their relationship will not cause a stylistic conflict when used one with other. Let's see those superheroes in action. This is the New York Times Mag Serif, Sans and Imperial, which are from the same superfamily. In this example, we have Freight Display and Big, Freight Text, Freight Sans, and Micro. All of these styles and typefaces are used for this particular project. But every family member has its own purpose, a role in a design. Some of them are for headlines, some of them for numerals, some of them for body copy, etc. By using a superfamily, we are ensuring that we will have enough aesthetic contrast and consistent style across the whole typographic scale or all of the typographic elements that we are using on a project. And the last example, Swiss superfamily, using 3 family members, Works, Mono, and sans serif. The next quick practice is not so quick and innocent as it seems at first. Combining serif and sans, commonly suggested as a great way to combine typefaces because of their contrasting features. Some have serifs and others don't. Let's check some examples of that contrasting categories, serif and sans serif. This combination is Nantes and Founders Grotesque, a very nice combination with great contrast. Serif typefaces and sans serif typefaces are like opposite forces. Like some people, opposites attract because they are different and can make a good combination. Here is another example by Darby Sans and Termina. For opposites to work as a pair, they should have at least something in common. If they are completely different, they will clash. These are some joint pairs of the opposing categories of sans serif and serif typefaces that work well. Now we're going to check some project examples where we can see those opposing categories in action and how they complement each other by creating that interesting connection or a bond. Darby Sans and Termina in an elegant setting. Gascon and Neuhaus Grotesque in a slightly different setting. Editorial New and Good Sans achieving really nice result. A few things to take into your consideration when combining serif and sans serif typefaces together, that things are not that straightforward as they seem. Not all of the serifs go well with the all sans serif typefaces. Some of them work better together and others not that much. When combining typefaces, try to compare their proportion. Their proportion should be similar in a letter form. They should also have some similarities in structure. All the time aim for hierarchy and good contrast. In typography, it's like in design. You need a hierarchy between the elements to achieve good tension and to see which elements are more important than others. This example is lacking a clear hierarchy, so we should try to improve it. Here is more improved version. You can clearly see the difference between the importance of elements. The headline is more focused and there is a much more clear distinction between the 3 elements: headline, leading text, and paragraphs that are set in body text. Here's the side-by-side comparison. We also need contrast, so the whole composition can be clear. This example would benefit with a bit of more contrast. We can achieve typographic contrast with size, color, weight, placement, using white space, and with width. Here's the improved version with more contrast between elements. Together with hierarchy, contrast helps us to focus readers on what's important. A side-by-side comparison of the low contrast and improved contrast version. And a final thing. Contrast is useful, but sometimes there can actually be too much contrast. Here you can see that it's not just a matter of weight or size, but also typeface category, width of the letters, style, and overall look and feel. Try to achieve a balance in mixing styles, sizes, colors, and other elements. Good design is about the right balance, not just using all of the tools from your toolbox at once, except if the project really demands it, or a brand is aiming for a certain type of aesthetic or a visual message. Then you can consciously break this rule. We covered some do's, and now we'll go through some few simple don'ts. The ones that can break your entire design merely by not understanding how they work. The first one is try to avoid pairing two sans serif typefaces together. Most of the time, there will not be enough of stylistic contrast between two of those. And because of their similar style, without serif, they could have that awkward tension, particularly if you pair two sans serif typefaces with a different construction or a form model. If you remember, we talked about it in the first chapter in the classification part. For example, dynamic sans serif, also known as humanist, together with geometric sans serif. These two would not work well together. They have a different form model, and paired together, they are in a clash. If you really need to combine two sans serif, try combining two of them which have the same form model, like two dynamic sans serif typefaces. Here is another example of two dynamic sans serif typefaces paired together. Or just try two geometric sans serif typefaces, depending on overall vibe of the project. And what about two serif typefaces? Are those safe to pair? Same rules apply as for the sans serif typefaces. If possible, avoid that pairing. If you really need to pair them, again, look at the form and characteristics to match them. Try to get the same genre or aesthetic. Additionally, mixing a display serif with a text serif from the same family or a superfamily is perfectly fine. They will work together nicely, and they will have a really consistent look and feel. Applying all of these principles can gain you some quick wins. Although these practices are not bulletproof solutions, they are just a small shortcuts that can save you time when it's necessary. By simplifying process and narrowing down your choices, you will have more time to focus on typesetting and achieving a typographic harmony. We already covered some practices for successful pairing. Now we're going to expand that knowledge about pairing and look at some possible strategies worth considering when you are searching for that perfect pair. Developing a typographic taste is hard work. It takes time and a lot of practice, and it's heavily leaned on intuition, taste, and a bit of experience. Nevertheless, these strategies should give you a better understanding of your possibilities when it comes to pairing typefaces. These are 4 different approaches or strategies to take when we pair typefaces. It's how I name them for better remembering. Let's start with familiar. We already covered that it's a good practice to use one family, twin, or a superfamily because they have a same foundation in letter construction. On a similar idea, we are expanding the family, in a way. Familiar strategy relies on pairing typefaces from the same type designer. Creating a typeface is hard work, and type designers are developing a specific aesthetic, and they have a particular approach in designing their typefaces. They are building on a particular direction or a vision, which is seen in their work across all of the typefaces they have created. Also, combining typefaces from the same type foundry is a good strategy to achieve a common aesthetic. Type foundries are same as people in a studio or agency working on the same project. Everyone is different, but still they have the same goal and a common vision. Type foundries are a group of people with the same vision when it comes to designing typefaces. Let's check some examples of that strategy applied. Here we have Monument Extended and Woodland from Pangram Type Foundry working together on a project. Mixo Navarra from Velveteen Type Foundry. There's a particular aesthetic seen in their work. And the Klim Type Foundry example, where we have domain display, domain text, founders grotesque working together. The next strategy is similarity. Look for typefaces that have similarities in their construction. Typefaces with similar proportions or anatomy can pair very good. The goal is to find similarities in construction, but still they have to have their differences in style or character, something that would spark an interest. Start by looking at similarities at X height of the same size typefaces. Both of these are set at the same size. This example is no good. The heights are quite different. This is a much better example. The idea is to get as close as possible. In this example, we see a significant difference in height of the letters at the same size, the cap height. Much better example is with Canela, that is almost the same height as Futura cap height letter. Check letter proportion. Take a look at the set width of a typeface you are considering as a pair. A set width is the comparable width of a specific letters. Some letters can be wider, others less wide. The width of every letter is designed in a relation to every other letter in the character set. Typefaces that have similar widths tend to get along visually. Other common similarities that you can search for are single story or double story letter A and G. These two are completely different. The first one is Georgia and has a double story A and the double story G compared to the second Futura. This example, not perfect but better. The goal is to have it similar but different in style. Let's check some project examples, how they work together. Here we have Futura and Schneider, Accurat and GT Sectra, and GT America and Canela, working pretty well together. The next strategy has something to do with personality. Every typeface has a personality and a voice. It has some visual characteristics that help to define a mood, a visual message that wants to be communicated. Your goal is to have typefaces who are sending the same vibe, that communicate the same feeling, like they are part of some cult or a specific group of people. Whatever that tone is, it needs to work together and sound as a group, without canceling each other or pulling in opposite directions. Try to avoid using completely opposing personalities. Try not to pair two typefaces that have different personality. When they both have a strong opposing styles, they are fighting for attention. Some typefaces just need a room to express themselves visually. It's similar like with people. When the big personalities get together, they will both fight to be in a center of attention. Things could become awkward quite soon. Here are some examples of typefaces working together and having the same vibe and transmitting the same message across. Another example of a completely different vibe. There are a lot of typefaces combined here, but they all speak the same language. Beautifully balanced and with same tone. A more edgy aesthetic with Lemmemoor, Eurostyle and Druk White. Really lovely combination. And the last strategy is using the typeface's form to match a good pair. Some of the typefaces are designed using a pen, some of them using a brush, others influenced by the tool in their shape or form. Going back to the form-based classification from the first chapter, let's quickly summarize the characteristics of a form classification. A dynamic type form, or referred sometimes as old style, some characteristics are thick serif and low contrast between thin and thick strokes. The stress is angled because it was made with slanted pen, the pen that is angled. The next one is transitional, that has a thinner serif and a little bit higher contrast between thin and thick strokes. Stress is vertical or sometimes slightly angled to the left. That's why called transitional. And this last one is static, with very thin serif, often horizontal, and high or even extreme contrast between thin and thick strokes. The goal of this strategy is to pair a dynamic form typefaces with other dynamic form typefaces. If the paired typefaces in that couple are from different main categories like dynamic serif and dynamic sans, pairing will be even better because of the stylistic contrast, similar but different. Let's go over a few project examples. Helvetius and GT Sectra, PF Isotex and NB Architect, and Financier Display and Metric. When evaluating type combinations, we need to remember our goal, what we are trying to achieve with a certain type pair. What kind of a feeling or a vibe is a selected combination transmitting? Which emotions are we trying to evoke with that combination? Remember those adjectives you defined for yourself before your research. However you pair your typefaces by personality or form, they should be always visually pleasing. And remember, typography is a lot about feeling, and it requires a lot of practice. When pairing or practicing, try as many candidates and their combinations. Analyze them, study the details, and look at the type compositions critically, trying to improve their harmony. Compare them side by side. More combinations you try, the greater the chance that you will find something interesting or unexpected. Hopefully, with applying some of the strategies we explored, or even applying quick wins and good practices, you will be able to pinpoint those details that are standing in a way to a perfect pair. A good advice after some typesetting is to slip over it and look at it next day with a fresh pair of eyes. Probably you will see things differently. Some of the combinations will not look the same as day before. That's also a good way to break the habit of using the same or very aesthetically similar type combinations in your design. And finally, to narrow down your choices, listen to your gut feeling before you select the winning pair. Your task as a designer is to make the type tastefully arranged. A beautiful set type will focus your reader and amplify your message. We'll examine how to properly work with type, which details are important in microtypography, and how to successfully break some of the rules. We already covered how every type has its purpose. A display should be used for headlines and text typefaces for body. But which one is the best to start working on typesetting? A lot of sources say when starting to arrange type, always start with a body text. I'm not sure that I agree. In most of the times that's true, but having a different purpose of a project can change your approach. If your project is text heavy and there will be a lot of reading, then you should definitely start with body. Then it will be helpful to start working on establishing that harmonious typographic scale, since the majority of the content will be body copy or similar copy size. But if your brand needs to differentiate and focus will be on headlines, then you should start with display text. If a brand needs to be heard, it needs to be loud or different, unique in a way, to get noticed amongst others. When headlines are carriers of your visual communication, focus on them first. After we selected or paired typefaces, then working with type is a critical step in our design process. Typesetting is an important method of setting the text in a layout on a page. It dictates how well our design will be and will it be pleasing and enjoyable to the reader. A typographic scale gives a rhythm to our design. It makes the type look consistent across the whole project. I usually set my scale during the project, not at the very beginning, like the first thing. I like to have a flexibility when I start and to test a content a bit, to understand it better. You can construct your own scale or use some existing solution like modular scale, whatever suits you and the project better. Construction of a grid depends on the project needs. You could use 2-column grid, or 3-column grid, or 4. You get the point. For more flexibility, or if a project requires, you can go even to have 24-column grid, or it can be horizontal and vertical, like a tablecloth grid. Grids are an essential part when it comes to arranging elements into a layout, but they are here to help us, not to restrain us. They should be looked at like a signpost. You don't want it in your face all the time, but when you need a help with your orientation, you should be able to quickly glance them and get a help with your direction. Kerning is a process of adjusting the space between characters in a proportional typeface, while spacing or tracking is adjusting the same amount of space at once between the characters. It's the overall spacing between the letters. Kerning is about visual space, not the actual space. It needs to feel right. Most of the body text doesn't need to be spaced or rarely needs. Maybe for smaller sizes when it needs to improve in legibility, we would then add a positive spacing. And for headlines, more often yes. The bigger the headline, the more it needs some negative spacing because of the size and optical harmony. Sometimes when designers want to achieve a certain aesthetic, they have a tendency to increase the line height. While that's good to some extent, keep an eye on this one. Most of the arranged paragraphs out there have their line height too big. There's a funny saying that goes, your lines are so apart of each other that a small boat can sail between them. And it's also much harder to read, because your eyes, when finishing with one line, has to make a big jump to the next line, and it gets tiring from a lot of jumping. Same goes in other direction. I understand that there is sometimes need to make the text tighter as a form of artistic direction, but be thoughtful about it. If we have longer lines in width, then it has to have a little bit more spacing between the lines. And for the shorter line length, it needs to have less spacing between the lines. How to determine the line length? How wide should the paragraph be? The same principles about reading applies. Use your best judgment. The default alignment should be left, in the west part of the world. It's much easier to read. It's more natural. particularly if there is more text to read. It becomes annoying if it's center-aligned. For the smaller amount of text, it's good, it's okay. Like always, try to take your judgment on it. Keep in mind that centered text is more strict or formal, serious like a tombstone. Watch out about the vertical spacing of the headlines and paragraph. In this example, it's not clear where the last headline belongs to. The proximity is not right. That's better. Those who are grouped together belongs together. And here's the side-by-side comparison. One more thing to be aware about paragraph vertical spacing. Even if it looks cleaner and more spaced, it is much harder to read if the paragraphs are so much apart of each other. It needs to feel natural and easy to follow. We already talked about contrast in the third chapter. You can achieve it by size, style, color, position, or weight. Use it to create an interest in your design. And a point of focus. Details make or break the design. It's same with typography. These are some finer details, which are often missed. They're important for readability, and they need to be used in a correct way. A hyphen appears at the end of the line when a word breaks into the next line, or some multi-part words are spelled with hyphen, like cost-effective. N dash indicates a range of values. That's different from the M dash that puts a nice pause in the text. Can be used to replace commas or parentheses. It can also be used as an attribution of a quote. Keep your punctuation hanging, so the text would be perfectly vertically aligned and easier to read without breaking your eyes flow. Use a proper multiplication and fraction symbols. With numerals, use all-style figures when having numbers in between the running text. They will align with the lowercase letters and feel more cohesive. Use tabular or monospace numerals for a perfect alignment when using numbers in a table. We covered a lot of practices, principles, and conventions. They're here to assist you and help you to move in the right direction. Once you feel more confident in your skill and a typographic eye, rules are to be bent or broken. Some of the best work is being made by questioning common patterns and breaking the firmly established rules. Let's look at some of the examples of how these rules have been successfully broken. A common rule on how many typefaces you are using on your project. That you shouldn't use more than 2 or 3 fonts per project. This is an example that shows a different perspective. This is a really nice example of use of so many fonts and still making it work together. Next one is about hierarchy. That you should always have a clear hierarchy in your design. When aiming for a different aesthetic, this rule is often broken. Legibility, also one very common rule. Your text should be always legible, or no one will use your website, product, or a thing. In this example, I've also used it in this course when mixing the typefaces together. That you shouldn't mix typefaces with opposing personalities. But what if the brand is eclectic and very, very unique? Then breaking this rule really serves the right purpose for this project. This is a great example made by Built in Amsterdam agency. Getting better at typography has to do with a little bit of learning and inspiring yourself, and a lot of practicing. Practicing without learning, or just learning without practicing, will only slow your process in becoming better at typography. In this final chapter, we will cover where to find inspiration and expand your knowledge. Also, we will cover some practical tips for practicing, and finally, going through some valuable resources and links. There is a great short video about the difference between our taste, influenced by the things we get inspired from, and our ability to produce good work. The video is called The Gap by Ira Glass, and you should definitely take a few minutes out of your schedule and watch it. A lot of things will be clear to you. It is a short story about the secret of creative success. The story has a strong message and it's beautifully crafted. In short, the essence is, if we are only feeding the inputs of our mind with inspiration and not executing on it, we are constantly widening the gap between what we know that is great work and what we are able to produce. I will leave the link in the download file. To become better designers, we need to inspire ourselves. Everything that goes in our mind is unconsciously produced in some way. That doesn't mean that we need to spend our days by researching the heck out of the internet. Claudio Guglieri has put it so thoughtfully. Inspiration is like sugar. A little bit will give you a kick, but if you ingest too much of it, you feel sick and unmotivated. Keep these two things in your mind, the gap and the sugar. Be conscious how much time you spend on inspiring yourself and how much practicing. To find a great source of inspiration, try to look outside of the medium you're working in. If you are designing websites, try to broaden your horizons, going outside of the genre. Some alternative choices: old books. I really love exploring old books. Typography in other cultures. Even if you don't understand the language, you can get a good feel about the clear hierarchy or contrast. All nicely balanced and interesting compositions. Also explore the books from a different era. My favorite thing when I was traveling more actively is going into vintage bookstores and just scavenging books there. Consider exploring a particular period of time, a different era. See their influences and what kind of aesthetic has influenced them. Typography is everywhere, and it's so interesting to see the differences in time and location. In movie sequences as well. It is a really great source of inspiration. I love to explore old and new magazines too. And of course, use the advantage of modern time. Explore, create, and organize collections on Pinterest or wherever you want. Or see a particular aesthetic, depending on which type of work are you saving on Save It the most. And lastly, check the inspiration galleries. There are so many good examples, from the awards, Site Inspire, WowWeb, Brutalist Webs, all of really nice galleries. Be sure to catalog your findings. It will be easier for the future to recall or find a particular reference. If you want to learn about typography and how it works, be sure to follow the work of type foundries. There is so much to learn. From checking the specimens or reading their journals or blogs. They share a lot of thinking, advices, and tips about type design, typesetting, and pairing typefaces. They also have a fonts in use section where you can see their fonts in action. I will provide some links in the download document, but to expand that circle, check the foundries online, particularly this archive where there's a list of type foundries even categorized by countries. Check also type.lol. It's crazy big foundry index, and it's updated quite often. Whichever type foundry you choose to follow, subscribe to their newsletter. You will get updates and news regarding new releases or discounts. Follow the type foundries on Instagram. They are putting a lot of good stuff there. GorillaType had a whole mini course on Academy about type and construction, where they made a series of educational posts and stories about the type. Also, don't forget about the independent type designers. There are some really great individuals. Give them some love by supporting them. Follow agencies, studios, and designers that have an interesting style or aesthetic when it comes to type selection and pairing. Be up to date what is happening in the industry. And yeah, leverage the sites like Typographica, Typewolf, and Font News. They're not just good for research, but also for learning and analyzing what works well and why. Practice, and practice some more. I can't stress the importance of this one. Like the basketball player who is going to train and shoot the hoops over and over. By the time his skill and competence grows. Sure, you need the games, the projects to apply your knowledge, but skipping in practice, your game will be off point. If you really want to become better at typography, there is no alternative to hard work. Like in anything else that requires time, persistence, and dedication. A kind of obsession. Be curious. Deconstruct the great work of others to learn how and why a good type works. Breaking down the grid, the typographic scale, the rhythm, study it to a single detail. By doing that, you will almost enter in the mind of a person who was doing that design. You will get a sense about the decision she or he was making in the process. Analyze it carefully and critically, always trying to find things to improve. These two helpers can help you out. You can inspect every font on a website and know their name or link to their foundry. I have created a simple document for you to download with links of most of the references I was mentioning throughout the course. Links to type foundries, independent type designers, inspiration galleries, and more. If I have missed anything, feel free to reach out on social networks or wherever you like. A big thank you. Hvala. Hopefully you enjoyed this course as much as I enjoyed creating it. Thank you for being a part of such an amazing community. Much love. And the final thing, becoming better at typography requires a lot of practice. Work on your typesetting skills and expand your typography knowledge.